Hey Chevra, what's cracking? Welcome back to Babel on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Tes of Masechta Ayruvin, Daf 79. Some of the things we will discuss today: Stam, dirt. Is dirt considered like just? Can you assume it's like part of the ground or not? I guess we'll find out. Like nafkaminas in terms of like if it's in a ditch, is the ditch considered filled in or not? A pile of grain that does not reach the roof. Is it a wall or isn't a wall? Stay tuned to Daf 79 to find out. Okay? And then, actually, extremely interestingly, we talk about shitufay mevo'os. And I have a feeling that there could be some major nafkaminas over here. But the Mishnah talks about how to actually do a shitufay mevo'os. We talk all about, we've spoken a million times about how you take some bread from all the chatzeris and then you put them in one chatzer. Maybe there are other ways to do it. So this could be super interesting. Chevra, let's move on. So we had learned a Mishnah yesterday towards the end of the daf that says that if you have two chatzeris and between them is a ditch, and the ditch is 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, so that would be a separation between the chatzers, and they would have to make separate Ayruvin. They cannot join together in one Ayruv. Now, the Mishnah had said that if you fill in the ditch with dirt, well then, they can be considered one chatzar, and they can make an Eruv together. So now, says the Gemara, Ba'afilu b'stama, 2 lines from the bottom of the Ayin Chesam and Beis, right? So it says, Malei afar, Ba'afilu b'stama, even stam dirt, meaning even if you didn't have specific intention to be mevatel the dirt, because we said yesterday at the end of the daf that straw, you would have to be mevatel the straw. You would have to say that I'm not planning on ever taking this straw, and if you do that, so then you could fill in the ditch with it. But we seem to be saying that when it comes to dirt, on the other hand, if you just put dirt in the ditch, well then it's considered part of the ground, and that would be considered filled in, even if you weren't specifically mevatel it. V'yatnan, but one second. We have a Mishnah in Ohalos. Exciting stuff. If you have a house and there is a dead body in this house, and so it's going to be matame the house, right? Tumas ha'oel. Now here's the thing. So let's say you have something on the roof of the house. Well, it's not going to be tameh because the tumah doesn't go past the roof. It stays in the house. It doesn't go up. However, if the house is completely filled with dirt, right? We learned about this in Masechta Brachos, that there has to be a tefach of space above the mace in order for the roof to be chotzetz. However, if there's no tefach of space, i.e., if the house is just completely filled with dirt, and well then the tumah will go up forever, indefinitely. It won't be considered in an ohel, and it will go up to the shamayim indefinitely. So now, what if this house is filled with dirt? So, we learn in a Mishnah, if you have a house that's filled with either straw or with pebbles, right, there's dirt, or right, meaning pebbles, and we had said in our Mishnah that if you fill in this ditch with either dirt or pebbles, so uvitlo batel, and you use mevatel these pebbles in the house, then they're considered batel, they're considered like earth, and if the house is filled with these pebbles, well then it will be considered like there's no chatzitza, and it's what's called tumah ritzutza, and it goes all the way up to the sky because there's no space of a tefach. Bitlo in, lo bitlo lo. And what we're saying is Davki has to be mevatel these pebbles in order for them to be considered earth, and in order for it to be considered like there's no space between this mace and the top of the house. However, if he wasn't specifically mevatel these tzoris, well then we would consider it just to be regular tumas ha'oel, and it wouldn't go, up through the roof. So what do we see from this Mishnah in Oilis? That when it comes to pebbles and also dirt, we're going to apply the same thing for dirt, you would have to have specific intention to be mevatel this dirt. And if you don't, then it's not considered like regular earth. And therefore, if we were to apply that to the case of our ditch, in the context of Ayruvin, so I would think that you would have to be mevatel the dirt that's in the ditch in order for it to be considered filled in and make one Eruv for everybody. But our Mishnah seems to be saying that when it comes to dirt, even if you had just bistam, even if you didn't have any particular intention, it would still be considered like the ditch is filled in. What do we do? Amar Rav Huna, Mantana Oyelis, Rabbi Yosihi. So Rav Huna says, well, who is the author of the Mishnah in Ohelos? Who's the one who says that you specifically have to be mevatel the dirt? That's Rabbi Yossi. But our Mishnah is not Rabbi Yossi. I guess Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Okay, say it. But one second. Rabbi Yossi, Ipcha Shaminan Le. How can you say that the Mishnah in Ohelos that says that you have to dafka be mevatel the dirt, the pebbles, how can you say that that's Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi dafka says the opposite. Titania, as we learn in a brisa, Rabbi Yossi Omer says Rabbi Yossi, Teven ve'ein asid lefano. So if you have straw in that house and you have no intention to remove it, Hareu kistam offer ubato. Well then, if you don't have any intention to move the straw, well then it's like just regular old dirt, and it'll be batal. Offer vasa the fanoso. However, if you have dirt and you dafka do intend to clear it out of the house, well then hareu kistam tevin. Well then it's like just regular old tevin velo batil, and it's not batal. No, so what do we see? So we see that according to Rabbi Yossi, actually, when it comes to ohelos, he says that stam dirt is batal. So how could we say that dafka the Mishnah ohelos that says that stam dirt is not batal is Rabbi Yossi? So El Rav Asi rather says Rav Asi Mantana Ayruvin Rabbi Yossi. So Rav Asi says no. That right? Okay, fine. So we found a definitive source that when it comes to ohelos, Rabbi Yossi is going to say that dirt is stam dirt is batal. So Rav Asi says that Rabbi Yossi is also the author of our Mishnah in Ayruvin that says that stam dirt is batal. Fine. Rav Huna bar Rav Yeshua Amar Tuma Ashabis Karamis. Rav Huna bar Rav Yeshua says, wait a second, rewind. Go back to the beginning. You asked the question that how can we say that on Shabbos this dirt is considered batal, and yet when it comes to ohelos, we have a Mishnah where it says that you would have to specifically be mevatel these pebbles. Rav Huna bar Rav Yeshua says this isn't a good kasha b'chlal. They're two, the apples and oranges. The apples being Ayruvin, the oranges being ohelos. Hanach isur Shabbos dafilu arniki nami mevatel inish. Don't ask me kashas from Shabbos. When it comes to Shabbos, even a wallet, right? A wallet is muktzah. So even a wallet, somebody's just gonna be, he's gonna be mevatel if it's muktzah, and he's just gonna, be mevatel it on Shabbos, nullify it, walk away from it. So therefore, in the context of Shabbos also, this dirt, which is certainly less valuable mistama than a wallet, you're going to be mevatel this dirt, and because you're mevatel the dirt, so it will be filling in the ditch, and it's just one big chutz, so you can make an eruv together. Rav Ashi Amar, Bayis Acharetz Karamis. Rav Ashi, takes a similar line, but with a different sort of axes on his scale, if you could sort of put it in that metaphor. But anyways, whereas Rav Huna bar Rav Yeshua says, how can you ask a kasha between Shabbos and ohelos? Rav Ashi says, how can you ask a kasha between ditches and houses? Bishlam acharetz limitam yokai, elabais limitam yokai. I understand a ditch. What do you do with a ditch? You fill in a ditch. So therefore it makes sense to assume that the dirt that's in the ditch is going to stay there. And therefore it'll make it all one big chutzner. However, most people don't fill in their houses with dirt. I'm in a house right now. It's not filled in with dirt. My parents lived in this house for a long time. They never filled it in with dirt. So therefore it makes sense to assume that a ditch, the dirt in the ditch is there to stay. Dirt in the house is let's just say less common, and there's no reason to assume that the dirt in the house is there to stay. Chevre, let's go weiter. Nasan Olav Neser Shorach of Dalad. We said that if you have this ditch between the two chutzers, and you take a board that is 4 tefachim wide, and you lie the board over the ditch and make like a bridge for yourself, some way to walk over this ditch. So Cheveh, don't forget, we're talking about 4 tefachim here. 4 tefachim is like, it's like half the length of the arm of this chair that I'm sitting in. It shouldn't be too hard to just kind of step over it. But anyways, you take a board and you lie it across the ditch. So now if you want, you can step on the board. Alright? It's probably easier to just walk over the thing. It's probably less dangerous to just step over the ditch. But alright, I'll upon him. So says the Gemara, so Amar Rava says, Rava lo shanu ela shenasan l'rochbo. So Rava says when we talk about that this board needs to be 4 tefachim wide, yeah, that's if you're going to be putting it essentially, I don't know if it makes sense to say perpendicular to the ditch, but from one side to the other, you lay it across the ditch and you walk. Fine. Aval orko, but if you were not planning to put it sort of across the ditch, but rather fill in the ditch with it, right? So if this ditch is 4 tefachim wide and you're going to take some wood and just kind of line the whole length of it, well then, you're going to put like pegs under it. Oh no, so it's not actually the whole length. It's just actually 4 tefachim, right? You just need to make like, the width of a Pesach. So if you take some wood and you just put it inside along the length of the ditch, 4 tefachim long, so then that already would be mema'et the ditch, right? Afilu kolshu, even if it's just a kolshu nami, that would be enough, and that would be considered like you make a enough for like a Pesach between the 2 chutzers, sharimiato midalad, because it's less than it's no longer a separation of 4 tefachim wide between the 2 chutzers, because you made it smaller than 4 tefachim, and therefore as long as you do that for a length of 4 tefachim, so that would be considered like a share of a Pesach, and then I guess it would be considered like there's an opening between these 2 chutzers, an opening in the wall, and or in the separation, and they could make a Eruv together. Weiter. Fine. Also, we said that if you have 2 balconies, and the 2 balconies are like next to each other, and there's no fences, and they just put a board between the balcony so that they could walk from one to the other if you're not scared. Amar Rava says, Rava, the Amar zo keneged zo, in when we say that, yeah, if the balconies are like right sort of next to each other on the same level, so then we could put out this board. Zo shelo keneged zo. But if they're not opposite each other, right? Let's say you have these 2 buildings and not flush against the, on the same wall. One of them, sticks out a little bit more, let's say. So then, low. So then you wouldn't be able to put a board between the 2 because they are not sort of at the same, like axis, I guess maybe you could say. And when we say also that if you have the 2 balconies, one on top of the other, you can't use them. You can't connect them with a board. That's only if there is 3 tefachim between them. But if there is less than 3 tefachim between these balconies, well then it's just a crooked balcony, right? So let's say you have these 2 balconies right next to each other, but one sticks out of the, one of the houses, kind of extends into the street, 2 tefachim longer. So basically there's 2 tefachim between the 2 balconies. That's acceptable because we'll say lovewood and it'll just be considered a crooked balcony, but not the end of the world. Okay. New Mishnah. Mat ben shebein shtei chatzeres. If you have a pile of straw, of hay, straw, animal food, that is between 2 chatzeres. Okay, so you basically have one big yard, but there's like a whole lot of animal food, like straw and whatever, in the middle, and it's basically, it's a wall of animal food. Okay, and that's a division that divides this thing into 2 separate chatzers. So gavoa asar tefachim, and this animal food, this hay, this straw is 10 tefachim tall. Me'arvin shnaim be'me'arvin echad. Well, those are 2 separate chatzers. They have to make their own individual chatzers. They can't. They have to make their own individual erevs. They can't join together in one erev for both of them. Elu ma'chilin mikan ve'elu ma'chilin mikan. And they can feed their animals from this stack of hay on Shabbos. So you have a whole bunch of this teven in the middle. So each of the chatzers are able to feed their animals from this teven even on Shabbos. If before Shabbos this pile of straw was less than 10 tefachim tall, well then you don't have a 10 tefach wall, and they can all just make one big eruv together. Says the Gemara, Rav Huna, said Rav Huna, Rav Huna says, yeah, it's all good. Both chatzers are, their animals can eat from this straw that's in the middle of the chatzer that's dividing it into two separate chatzers. Their animals can eat from that, that's fine. But don't take the straw yourself. Don't pick up the straw, put it in like a kupa, some kind of a box or a container, and then give that to your animals to eat. No. Your animals can, go to the pile and eat the straw themselves, but don't, collect it yourself, put it in a container, because we're concerned that you are going to minimize this collection to be less than 10 tefachim, and then it's going to cause an issue, because then if this pile is no longer 10 tefachim, well, then it's actually considered like one big chutzner, but you didn't make an eruv, so you can't carry, and, it'll be it could lead to a mess. So we say, just let the animals eat on their own. They're going to eat slowly, and then we don't have to be concerned that they are going to ruin the wall. But one second, it would be permitted to take your animal, right? Meaning, we just said that you wouldn't be allowed to actually take the straw yourself and put it in a kli for your animal, but you would be allowed to take your animal and bring the animal to the pile. Don't we have to be concerned that if you take your animal to the pile, then you might end up taking some straw yourself, which you're not allowed to do? A person is allowed to bring his animal to grass and the animal can be standing and eating from the grass. But do not take your animal and put it by some muktzeh on Shabbos, because when it comes to grass, we're not concerned that you're going to rip the grass out of the ground. Sinitzer d'oraisa, we're not concerned that you're going to rip the grass out of the ground. However, if you bring your animal to some muktzeh stuff, well, we're concerned that you might end up picking up the muktzeh, right? Because it's only midrabanan. So just like when it comes to muktzeh, you're not allowed to bring your animal there. So I would think here as well, you wouldn't be allowed to bring your animal to this pile of straw, because we have to be concerned that even though it's only a din d'rabanan, we should have to be concerned that he's going to collect some of the straw himself, which he's not allowed to do, and put it in a container. So the Gemara answers, that's correct. He would not be allowed to take his animal to the pile so that the animal can eat from the pile. It's true. We would be concerned that maybe he's going to take from that pile and put it in a box for the animal, and that would not be allowed. However, what is it talking about? He basically stands in the way of the animal, so that the animal has no choice but to walk to where the food is and then eat. So he's not like actively schlepping the animal to the pile. That would not be allowed. But he can kind of like give the animal, position himself in places that the animal will really have no option other than to walk towards the food. So Rav Huna had said that you're not allowed to put any of this straw into your own kli, into your own box of sorts. But instead what you do is the animal can essentially go there on its own and eat. Okay. But we learn in a brayso, if you have a house and it's between two chatzers, oy va'avoy. Okay, you guys ready for this? So basically what we're talking about here is we're talking about, one second, let me take off my sweatshirt so I can explain this better. One sec. The sweatshirt has nothing to do with the explanation, by the way. I was just hot. Anyways, so I'm back, by the way. So for anybody who's not watching the video, I'm not wearing a sweatshirt anymore. I took that off. Okay, let's go weiter. So we're talking about, imagine you have like this big yard, okay, this big chutzner, essentially. and you have two houses in the chutzner. So let's imagine north, south, east, and west, okay? So you have one house in the west part of the chutzner. You have one house in the east part of the chutzner. Great. And there's a wall dividing this chutzner in half. So basically it's two chutzers, right? So you have a wall down the center. Now here's the thing. There's another structure. This structure is in the south of the chutzner. This structure has three sections. There's one section, and this structure is owned by the same owners, right? So you have Reuven owns the house in the west part of the chutzner. Shimon owns the house in the east part of the chutzner. And then there's this shed in the south part of the chutzner, and it's made up of three compartments. Compartment on the west belongs to Reuven, who owns the house on the western side. Compartment on the right, which is the eastern side, so that is owned by Shimon, who owns the house on the eastern side of this chutzner. And this middle compartment of these sheds is open to the other two compartments of the sheds, and it's got some straw there. And the straw is piled up 10 tefachim tall. So basically what we have here is we have two chutzers. There's a wall dividing these two chutzers, but this wall hits where it hits the structure on the southern side, it hits it right in the middle, and the wall stops at this structure, but there is straw inside of the structure, and that straw goes up 10 tefachim tall. So it effectively divides this chutzner in half, and what you have is, in each half you have one house and one shed. Got that? Great. So, fine. We were learning about it. So if you have this shed structure that's divided in half between two chutzers, and you filled up the middle one with straw, and it's 10 tefachim tall. So, well, effectively you have two separate chutzers, so they have to make two separate Eiruvs. They can't make one Eyruv together. Now, each, Reuven and Shimon would each be able to, and this is the whole question, is from this line right here, even though the brisa continues, but the question is that this brisa is saying that Reuven and Shimon would each be able to davka take straw and put it in their own kli, and then feed it to the animals, right? Whereas Rav Huna said that you wouldn't be allowed to actually take it yourself. Okay, but the brisa continues. If the pile of straw becomes less than 10 tefachim, shneim asurim, well then, both of them are asur. Meaning, if the pile became less than 10 tefachim on Shabbos, so when Shabbos started, there were two separate chutzers, but during Shabbos, the pile became less than 10 tefachim, so now they're basically open to each other. So then they are both asur because they didn't make an Eruv with each other before Shabbos. Okay? So what can you do if you want to be able to carry? So, meaning again, what happened? When Shabbos started, it was two separate chutzers. On Shabbos, the pile of tevin that was dividing them became less than 10 tefachim, so therefore now nobody's allowed to carry. But what can happen is Noel as Beso umavatal as Rishuso, who asur v'chaveru mutter. What Reuven can do is Reuven can say, you know what, I'm going to be a nice guy. I'm going to lock the door to my shed. By locking the door to my shed, I'm unable to get into the shed, and therefore I'm unable to walk through the shed into the other chutzner. And by locking the door and being mavatal the shed to Shimon, well then Shimon is basically the only owner in his chutzner, and he can carry in the chutzner, in the shed, wherever he wants. And the same thing would apply also if you have, let's say, two cities, they're 4,000 amos away from each other. So one tchum finishes at 2,000 amos, and then the other tchum finishes at 2,000 amos. But right at the end, where they meet, is a ditch that's filled with grain. So each of the two sides of the tchum would be able to chop grain from in the ditch, and we're not concerned that they're going to chop from, the other half of the ditch that belongs to the other tchum. Okay? Right? So this brisa is saying that just like when it comes to this straw that's dividing the two chutzers, they'd be allowed to fill up their containers with straw and give to the animals. The same thing applies also when it comes to these ditches, right to this grain that's between these two tchum Shabboses. They can chop the grain. We're not concerned that they're going to chop part of the tchum that belongs to the other city. Katani miyaz zenos in the soch kupasu v'yaychil v'zenos in the soch kupasu v'yaychil. No, but what's the important thing for us? The important thing for us is that the Brisa said that Reuven and Shimon are actually allowed to take some of the straw and put it in their kalim and give it to the animal. Rav Huna said they wouldn't be allowed to do that they would davka, the animals can eat it on their own, but you wouldn't be allowed to take it yourself. So here's the answer, Chevra. Amre, they say, bias, when it comes to a house, kevin the ikra tikra, since there's a roof on the house, right, and this shed has a roof, ki mafchis minkra le milsa, achala minkra le milsa. The nafkamina is that shed had a roof, and therefore, since it has a roof, you can always be, just naturally, when you look at this pile of grain, you're gonna visually notice the difference between the top of the pile and the roof. And therefore, you would be allowed to use a kli and just take some grain and give it to your animal, because if you notice that, it's actually diminishing the height, substantially, so then you will stop doing it. Whereas if it's literally just between two chutzers out in the open, you won't notice that it's actually less than 10 tefachim tall. So, that's why it's allowed in this shed, but Rav Huna still maintains that it would not be allowed when it's just dividing two chutzers. Chavre, let's move on. Nismait ateven me'asar tvachim shnein asurin. If the grain be, so we're going weiter, right? We're still dissecting this very interesting brisa with the sheds, right? So we said that if the grain becomes less than 10 tvachim on Shabbos, well then nobody can carry in the chutzner anymore, because now there's no separation between the chutzner and they didn't make an eruv. Ha'asara shari. But as long as the grain is 10 tefachim tall, well then, they would be allowed to carry in their respective chutzers. So what do we see? So we see that if you have this pile of grain, as long as it's 10 tefachim tall, it doesn't actually have to reach the ceiling, right? Remember we had on Daf Ayin Amud Beis a week ago, we had a machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, right? That there was this mansion, and the mansion was divided into five different sections, and the kasha was, does each section need to produce their own, need to contribute their own bread to the chotzer, to the eruv, or is one enough for the whole thing? Beis Hillel said that one was enough for the whole mansion. Beis Shammai said everyone needs to bring their own, and there was like all sorts of different opinions over there, right? And there was, Rav Nachman had two opinions over there. His first opinion was that the machlokas is when the wall is less than 10 tefachim, but if it's 10 tefachim, then even Beis Hillel would agree that everyone would have to bring their own bread, right? Now, all the other opinions, however, said that even if the wall is higher than 10 tefachim, Beis Hillel would still say that you could still just bring one loaf of bread for everybody. So, but here we're saying that if this pile of hay is 10 tefachim tall, well then that's already considered a separation. So, ha'asar shari. So the Gemara says, look, as long as this pile of grain was 10 tefachim tall, well then that would be considered a separation between these two chutzers, and each chutzer can carry. Even though the ceiling is much higher. So shmamina mechitza she'em magios l'tikra shman mechitza. So to get back to our sugya from a week ago, well, walls that don't actually reach the ceiling are actually considered walls. And then essentially it would be a question on any of those opinions who said that Beis Hillel would still maintain that they could bring one loaf of bread for everybody, even when it's 10 tefachim tall, but it doesn't reach the ceiling. Abaye says, no. Forget about the Gemara a week ago. No. This is talking about where the roof was only 13 tefachim off the ground, less than 13 tefachim off the ground, and therefore from the top of this pile of 10 tefachim to the roof was less than 3 tefachim, and therefore we'd say lavud, and it's considered one solid wall. V'teven asara, and the straw is 10 tefachim tall. Rav Huna bar Rav Yoshua Amar afilu tema b'bayis asara. v'tevin shiva v'mashu. You can even say that it's talking about a house that is 10 tefachim tall, and the grain is 7 and a little bit tefachim tall, and therefore, still, again, you could say lavud. T'chopachus mishlosha k'lavud dami, because if it's less than 3 tefachim separation, we'll say lavud, and it'll be as though the entire, right there, that the grain reaches the ceiling is 10 tefachim tall, you have a 10 tefachim divider. Great. Bishlam al-Abaye, hanu diktani me'asar. So, I understand Abaye, because Abaye says, after all, that we're talking about a pile that's 10 tefachim tall. That's why the Brisa is talking about if the pile becomes less than 10 tefachim. Because after all, we're talking about a pile of 10 tefachim. But according to Rav Huna ben Yeshua, who says that the pile is in effect really only 7 and a little bit, we're talking about a pile that's 7 and a little bit tefachim tall, and then because of lavud, it's considered 10 tefachim. But my me'asar, what does it mean that if the grain if the tevin became less than 10 tefachim, it's only 7 and a little bit to begin with. So mitoras asar. It means from the halachis of asar, meaning if it becomes less than 7 and a little bit, and then you can't say lavud anymore, well then nobody's going to be able to carry. Shnein asurin. So we said that if the pile becomes less than 10 tefachim, so nobody's allowed to carry. They're both asur. Shmamina, Diyur Nabayin B'Shabbos Asurin. Going way back when to Daf Yud Zayin of Masechta Ayruvin, we had the question about the caravan, right? And I think we said we need 3 people for a caravan. The shaila was, what if somebody comes on Shabbos? Can that be considered, right? Does it have an effect? So we're saying, well, yeah, apparently from over here, that Diyur Nabayin B'Shabbos Asurin, that if new people come to live there on Shabbos, well, it's going to create an issue, just like over here, that when Shabbos began, there was a wall between them. But now, right, with this straw, now the straw became less than 10 tefachim, so now it's considered like there are new people living here, and they didn't make an eruv. So Shmamina Diyur Nabayin B'Shabbos Asurin, that these people come on Shabbos are asur, and we don't say Hoel V'Hutra, that since when Shabbos began it was mutter, it remains mutter. But the Gemara says, no, that's not a good proof, because because the reason why nobody's allowed to carry when it's less than 10 tefachim is because maybe it actually happened from yesterday. So because we can't know for sure that it happened on Shabbos, that is why we say that nobody can carry. But it's not necessarily a proof about whether we say that Diyur Nabayin B'Shabbos are asurin or not. So we said no. So what can we do so that at least somebody can carry? So we say if Reuven wants to be a nice guy, he can lock his access to the shed and be mevatel the shed to Shimon. Tarte, why do we need Reuven to do both of these things? Hachikam. This is what the Bryce is saying. Oh no, el es beso. Oh mevatel es v'shuso. No, it's either or. Either he can lock the door so that he doesn't have access to it, or he can be mevatel the shed. But he doesn't have to do both. By same, or if you want, I will say, Lo'olam tarte. Really, he has to do both. He has to lock the door and be mevatel the shed. Because since he's accustomed to using his shed, so unless he also locks it, well then he might come to use it. Hu asur v'chaveru mutter. So once Reuven locks the shed and is mevatel the shed, well then he's not allowed to use it, but Shimon can. Pshita, this is obvious. No, the chiddush is that even if Shimon is then mevatel back the rishus, right, the shed to Reuven, still Reuven would be unable to use the shed. And it's teaching us the ein mevatlin v'chozun mevatlin. Back to that question of, can one person be mevatel, there's rishus, and then they'll be mevatel back to him. So this seems to be saying no, right? We're saying that in a situation where Reuven locks the door and is mevatel to Shimon, even if Shimon is mevatel back to Reuven still wouldn't be allowed to carry in there. And we say the same thing in like a pit of straw that is between 2 tchum Shabboses, that you'd be allowed to take grain and give it to your animals. We're not concerned that you're going to take it from the from outside of your tchum. Pshita, this is obvious, right? Why should Eruv Tchumen be any stricter than Eruv Chatzeres? So lo tzricha Rabbi Akiva. Well, because the chiddush here is according to Rabbi Akiva, Damar Tchumen Doraisa, who says that Tchumen are mida oraisa. So I might think that because tchumen are de oraisa, well then I should be more machmir and not allow people to take grain from this ditch, because maybe you'll take it from further than 2,000 amos, from the other side, from the other city's tchum. Kamash Malan, that even there it's okay, and they can feed their animals from this ditch. Very beautiful. Alright, Chevah, new Mishnah. Ketzad mishtatvin bin mevo'os. So how do you do a shitufay mevo'os? This is awesome. And I'm wondering if there's going to be big nafkaminas here for us over here in Masechta Ayruvin. Because I don't really participate lemaisa in my community's Eruv. I don't think I ever have. And so I'm kind of wondering, I don't usually contribute some bread, so how does that work? There must be some kind of trick that we haven't learned about yet. So this might be sort of a step in that direction. Let's see. So Ketzad mishtatvin bin mevo'os. How do you do a shitufay mevo'os? So you have a bunch of chatzers that open up into a mevo'os. So how do you join them together? What do you do? So obviously one option is each chatzer contributes bread and they put it in one of the chatzers. That's one way. But another way to do it is maniach es achavis, that one person in one of the chatzers can just take a barrel ve'omer and say harei zo l'chol b'nei mevo'os. He just takes a barrel of wine or something and he says, you know what? Hey, everybody in all the chatzers, everybody in our mevo'os, enjoy this wine. It's for everybody. And then he gives it to them, he transfers it to them, by way of his son or his son or his daughter who are gedolim, that they're old enough. Or by way of his servant or maidservant who are Jewish, and by his wife. But he can't be mizake. He can't transfer the ownership of this wine by way of his sons and daughters who are small, or not by way of his servant and maidservant who are not Jewish, because their hands are like his hands. i.e. they're he's responsible for them, and therefore he can't be mazaka through them. And the Gemara is about to say, let's just read it now, what this means. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Chavis shel shitufay mevo'os, that this barrel of shitufay mevo'os, tzarich la'agbiah min hakarka tefach, you have to pick it up off the ground by one tefach. So basically what happens is, you have this guy, he says, hey everybody, here's this barrel of wine, it belongs to everybody, enjoy it. And then what happens is, his son or his daughter or his wife, whoever it is, takes his barrel and picks it up, and by picking it up, they kind of acquire it on behalf of everybody in the mevo'os. And that is a good shitufay mevo'os. Isn't that cool? So now I wonder if this works for Eruv, I don't know, we've had interesting things recently about I don't know, maybe shitufay mevo'os, but we don't really have mevo'os around here, I don't think. In Teaneck, New Jersey, I don't think that they really have mevo'os. I think that probably what we do is we make use the fish line, we make a one big chatzer, and then we do some kind of Eruv v'chatzeres, I assume. So maybe that's how we kind of do it, that we're somebody's mizake, so maybe somebody picks it up and and makes it on behalf, acquires it on behalf of everybody. The following two things were said by the elders of Pumbedisa, and Rashi points out there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin and Yud Zayin Amud Beis that says that the elders of Pumbedisa is Rav Yehuda. So one of the things that these elders of Pumbedisa said is this, about having to pick up the Eruv v'chatzeres, the shitufay mevo'os. Idach, what's the other statement of the elders of Pumbedisa? Makadesh, somebody who makes kiddush. Im to'am milo lugmav yotza v'imlav lo yotza. If he tasted a cheekful of wine, well then he fulfills his obligation. But if he doesn't taste a cheekful of wine, then he does not fulfill his obligation of making kiddush. Amar Rav Chaviva, said Rav Chaviva, Hanami Save de Pumbedisa Menu. The following also is said by the elders of Pumbedisa. The Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Ostin Medur L'chai B'Shabbos, says of Yehuda in the name of Shmuel that you're permitted to make a fire for a woman who has just given birth on Shabbos. So initially they thought to say that, oh, okay, fine, this is specifically for a woman who's given birth, but not necessarily just for any person who's sick. Fine, and they thought to say, and maybe you can only make this fire during the winter, but not in the summer. However, Idmar, but it was stated, says of Chia bar Oven, the line of the group, Amar Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, Heikiz dam v'nitztanin, if a fellow bloodletted and now he was cold, Osen lo madur b'Shabbos, you can make for him a fire on Shabbos, v'afilu b'tkufas tammuz, even in the middle of the summer. Amar Ameimar says, Ameimar hanami saved the Pumbedisa aminu. This was also said by the elders of Pumbedisa, the Idmar, that it was stated, Eizoi Asherah Stam. What's an Asherah tree? What can you assume is a tree that was worshipped for Avodah Zarah? Amar Rav, said Rav, Kol shekomrin shomin osa, if the priests, if the Avodah Zarah priests, is that what they're called? Maybe. So if they are guarding the tree, ve'ein to'amin perosea, yet they do not eat its fruits, well, that's a giveaway that it's an Avodah Zarah tree. Ushmuel Amr said Shmuel, Gagon da Amre Hani Tamri l'Shichra Devei Nitzufay. For example, they said these dates are going to be used for beer for our Avodah Zarah. Teshasu le b'yom Edom, because they drink that beer on the day of their Avodah Zarah worship. So that is going to be that's how you know it's an Asherah tree. V'amruli savi de Pumbedisa, and said to me the elders of Pumbedisa, Hilchos HaKavasi de Shmuel, that the halacha is like Shmuel, that it's based on if they say that we're going to use these dates for Avodah Zarah beer, so then it's an Asherah. All right, very interesting. Chavre, that was Daf Ayin Tes of Masechta Ayruvin. We even got to the top of Daf Pei of Masechta Ayruvin. This is really awesome. We're getting really close, Chavre. Daf Pei. In another 10 days, we're going to be up to Daf Tzadi. We're getting really, really close to the end of Masechta Ayruvin. Chavre, I mean, who would have thought that we would be getting to the end of Masechta Ayruvin, one of the hardest Masechtas in all of Shas? Unbelievable. Chavre, so we talked about Stam dirt. When you have dirt, can it be considered just like, if you have dirt in this ditch, so can we consider it part of the ground, in which case it would be filling in the ditch and making it one big chutzner? So Rav Huna said, so now the shaila was that so our Mishnah seems to be assuming that yes, just regular old dirt is considered like part of the earth, and it would be, it would just make one, it would fill in the ditch, separating the chutzers and making it one big chutzer. However, we have a Mishnah in Oelos, which says that Stam dirt, you would have to dafka be mevatel in order for it to be considered like earth. So Rav Huna says that our Mishnah is Reb Meir, whereas, well, he doesn't say that specifically, but he says that the Mishnah in Oelos is Reb Yossi, and then Stam over here, Stam Mishnah is Reb Meir. Rav Asi says that Davka, he proves, right, the Gemara proved that Reb Yossi's opinion is actually that Stam Mishnah is Stam offer is bottle, like our Mishnah. So he says, so Rav Asi says that the Mishnah in Ayruvin is Davka Reb Yossi. Rav Huna Beit Rav Yoshua said that you can't really ask the kasha because one of them is talking about Shabbos, i.e. our Mishnah, but the Mishnah in Oelos is talking about Tumah. And on Shabbos, people are mevatel things like their wallet even. So certainly they're going to be mevatel this dirt. Rav Ashi says that there is a difference between a house and a ditch. Dirt in a ditch, you're mevatel, and you're not planning to ever take out of the ditch. Whereas you're not planning to keep to have dirt in your house. So therefore, Stam offers bottle in the context of the ditch, but not necessarily in the context of the Shabbos of the house. We talked about a pile of grain that does not reach the roof. So initially we wanted to say, so what do we see? That if you have something that's 10 tfachim tall, even though it doesn't reach the roof, so it would be considered a divider, a mechitza. But Abai said, no, that's stuff we're talking about where the roof was 13 tfachim, and therefore so the grain was 10 tfachim, and it was a little bit less than 13 tfachim, the roof, so it was less than 3 tfachim between it, so we could say lavud. Rav Huna Beit Rav Yoshua said that we're talking about where the pile is 7 tfachim tall, and the roof is 10 tfachim tall, well, a little bit more than 7 tfachim, so also lavud. Then we talk about how to make shitufay mevo'os, which is super interesting, right? That basically, somebody is just a nice guy and says, hey, here's this barrel of wine, it belongs to everybody. Then somebody picks it up and is mizaka it to everybody, basically makes it belong to everybody. That was Daf Ayin Tes. Peace.